Okay, and welcome everybody. Today I am delighted to be able to welcome David Brock. And David is, well, he has a long, long career, as you can see from his bio here. He spent a long time at numerous different companies. You can see companies like IBM and Bank of America, working with those, jump out. He's an acknowledged thought leader, works with companies large and small today, particularly to help them on strategic sales issues, sales management. Today, we particularly want to focus in on David's book here, The Sales Manager Survival Guide. And if you look at the statistics, I mean, the research has shown that sales managers, their tenure can be as little as a year and a half, sometimes even less, because it is one of the toughest jobs that you can possibly have. And very few people are really prepared for it. So we want to dive in today and talk about the Sales Manager Survival Guide and how sales managers can really excel at the job. Because I personally believe they are the greatest revenue multiplier when the job is done right. So before we start, my name is John Golden. I'm the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer with Pipeliner CRM. And we like to bring you these interviews and value-added content with thought leaders so that you can understand the profession of sales that much more intimately. David, before we start talking about the book and about sales management, talk a little bit about your personal experiences with sales management and how you got into sales management in the first place and developed this interest in the area.
Okay, well, those are a couple of questions. What I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we see as the crisis in sales leadership and sales management. Is we work with, dozens of companies every year around the world, and one of the common things we're seeing, or one of the common themes, is the plight of the frontline sales manager. If you look at it, we now have kind of the premise that the frontline sales manager is the most important, but probably the most difficult job in sales these days, because inevitably frontline sales managers find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. Their job is to translate kind of the strategies of the business into day-to-day execution with their teams. And, in that, there's a lot of conflict that arises of how do I support what my manager and what my manager's manager wants, and how do I grow the business, yet how do I drive the performance of each individual in the team? And when we look at it, there aren't many tools, there aren't many things that frontline sales managers have to guide them. We look at training. Sales training in the U.S. is somewhere around a $4 to $5 billion business, yet the investment in frontline sales manager training is at best a couple $100 million. Yeah. We look at tools, we look at even coaching for those managers. So there's really a crisis, I think, in the frontline sales manager. And if we don't address them, we won't drive sustained sales performance in our organizations.
So when you first became a sales manager, did you get any training? Did anyone guide you and tell you what you needed to do?
Yeah, I was actually very blessed in this. I started my career in IBM, went up the food chain as a salesperson, and eventually got into a sales management job, I think sometime when I was maybe 28, 29 years old. And I was blessed in a couple of areas. One is the team that I managed was a team of specialized kind of sales consultants. And kind of fortunately or unfortunately, all of them had a lot of sales management experience. We had put together this team from some of the plant managers from around the world, from some of the engineering labs from around the world. So the team I had to manage was, the youngest was 5 years older than me. The oldest was about 10, 15 years older than me. All of them had had extensive management experience. And what they wanted me to do was just stay out of their way.
Right.
Uh, and and so I had to figure that out. But within my first 2 weeks of being named a manager, I went to a really comprehensive school to learn how to lead and learn how to manage. And that's something that we don't see many organizations offering these days.
No, not at all. And what I liked about when I was looking at your book is, if you start off at the very beginning, I mean, I think one of the fundamental issues is I'm not sure people really understand the job. I mean, people have
Yeah.
made a sales manager. You're a top performing salesperson or whatever you're promoted, but I think very few people understand the job. Even somebody who's been a salesperson has worked under a sales manager really understands the job. And certainly those above, I don't think really understand the sales manager job.
Yeah, I would agree with you quite a bit. And I think, if you look at people are named sales managers. So typically what happens is there's an announcement, there's a congratulations, your manager shakes your hand and says, by the way, I need a forecast on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And that's your onboarding process. And also, I think we have to go back to, the idea of what's a sales manager, and typically the response, what's the job of sales manager, and typically the response is, to make the numbers.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, you think of how do you make the numbers? You only make the numbers through your people.
Mhm.
So really the job of a sales manager is getting things done through their people and through the team that they're responsible for. And the way you make your numbers, the way you achieve your goals is maximizing the performance of each individual on the team. So I think we miss that fundamental about what the job is of a sales manager. There are all sorts of things we do as sales managers: reporting, analysis, hiring, firing, coaching, development, and so on and so forth. But at a fundamental level, it's really about getting things done through your people and maximizing their performance.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things that you say at the beginning of your book is around the first 30 days. Normally, the first 30 days of any job, you're really trying to go full belt, right? Because you want to get in
Yeah.
there, you want to prove yourself. But you say the opposite. You say slow down. Why slow down?
Yeah, I think that you look at, some of the great characteristics of great salespeople is that we're always action oriented. We want to go in and start doing things and achieving and so on and so forth. And I think that translates a lot into brand new frontline sales managers. But the problem is that's kind of a ready, fire, aim approach. Until we know what we should be doing, how we can be most effective with it, and all, we're just kind of probably causing more damage than we are doing good. So we need to take the time. We need to take the time to work with our people, go out and visit customers with them, learn about the customers and what they do, learn about how each one of your people engages the customers, whether they're field salespeople or whether they're inside working on the phones. Participate in those calls, both to see what the customers are doing and to see how those people work. Get to know them as human beings and people. Get to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, what their dreams are, so on and so forth. If you're new to the company, for instance, you've been hired as a sales manager from outside, get to know how things get done within your company. What are the resources that you and your sales team can leverage? How do things work both kind of formally and informally? What does the communication flow looks like? So you need to spend probably your first 30 or so days wandering around with your salespeople, wandering around with the customers, and wandering around internally within the organization, building your knowledge of the people and how things get done.
Yeah, and then I noticed in the book that the next 30 to 60 days, for me, that looked like a really critical period that could either set you up for success or failure. I mean, it's the time when you establish your metrics, you get your organization
Yeah.
to correct, you start looking at the tools you're going to use. So talk a little bit about that period, because that for me really came across as a really critical period. So you've done your 30 days of research, you've eased yourself in. but
Yeah.
now you're really laying the foundation.
So now, roughly, 30 days in and so on, what you're doing is you've developed some ideas of things that you may want to do, things of, particular skills you need to build within the team, maybe some problems that you have, maybe some opportunities that the team may be missing or not addressing as well. So as you start developing your strategy, it's important to share that strategy and get the feedback from the organization. And the reason is, to get their wisdom and their experience to help you build a better strategy. This is, truly the case of 1 + 1 = 3. And 2 is to gain ownership of it. Because as we look at being leaders, it's not really our ideas that are so important, but it's the ownership that our team has of the ideas
Right.
and their willingness to execute it relentlessly. So that next 30 days is a process of developing some ideas, testing them with your team, refining them, getting that ownership, getting them to say, this is what we need to be doing. This is how we need to be driving to achieve our goals, and then working collaboratively in the execution of that.
Excellent. Okay, let's move now and talk coaching. Okay, so coaching is, for me, probably one of the most misunderstood areas, and just in general, in a lot of people
Yeah.
grow up looking at coaching and they think of my football coach in high school, or my soccer coach, or my basketball coach, and this was the guy who basically told me what to do, and then I went out and did it. And then if I wasn't doing it, he shouted at me from the sidelines to do it. And if I still couldn't do it, he just ran out on the court and showed me how to do it. And I think that's how a lot of people grow up with coaching. But explain to me, what is sales coaching and what is it not?
Okay. First, I think I think we do have a misunderstanding of coaching. I think the examples that you used of the football coach and so on are actually bad examples of sports
Mm-hmm.
coaching. You know, uh, the coaches I've had, I compete in things like triathlon and on bikes and so on, and the coaches I have helped me learn and helped me discover myself how to do better. And I think that's the secret of really good coaching. You can be in there are basically two different styles of coaching we talk about. One is a directive style of coaching, which is telling people what to do.
Mm-hmm.
The other is the counter. It's the non-directive style of coaching, which is helping people learn and helping people discover. So as we look at, for instance, doing deal reviews with our people, we can tell people what to do. They go out and execute it, and they come back and say, what's next? And when we're doing that, we aren't, number one, developing the capabilities of the people, because it all comes back to us as the manager. And pretty soon, if you look at the process, we become the bottlenecks in the process, and we aren't developing the capabilities of our people. So you want to develop a kind of up to a non-directive style, which gets people to kind of think and discover for themselves, how do I build a better strategy for this deal? What are some of the things I might be missing? How do I address those things? How might I, compress the sales cycle? You get the person thinking about that, and the discussion that the sales manager has with the salesperson excuse me, is more of a collaborative kind of problem-solving discussion. The power in that is they internalize that, they build that skill, and pretty soon they're going out and executing it, not just on the deal that you reviewed, but on every single deal they're executing. So you get a huge multiplier effect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things we have to be cautious about is there are times for directive coaching and there are times for non-directive coaching. The example I like giving is, if I'm in a car and my salesperson is driving me straight to a light post at 60 miles an hour, I'm not going to be going through a non-directive process saying, what do you think might happen if we hit that light post head on? I'm going to say, put on the damn brakes.
Mm-hmm.
So there are times when we have to selectively use directive coaching. When there are high risks, when there are possible great consequences, where there are real-time challenges and so on. But as much as possible, we want to opt towards non-directive coaching.
Right, right. Let's talk about something practical. Pipeline reviews, right? One of the mainstays of sales management, sales coaching. People are doing it
Yeah.
on a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis, depending. But talk about how can you make sales pipeline reviews more effective?
Yeah, it's funny. I've sat through thousands and thousands of pipeline reviews in my career, and the funny thing is that virtually 100% of those pipeline reviews end up becoming deal reviews.
Hmm.
And how it happens is we're starting
Sure.
to look at the pipeline, and all of a sudden we look at this deal with pipeline or CRM.
Hmm.
And we start talking about it, and all of a sudden we've drifted away from a pipeline review and we're doing a deal review. So I think the challenge we have to have is we have to be very clear about what are the objectives of a pipeline review. And basically, the objectives of any kind of pipeline review you do are fairly simple. Is, do I have high integrity in the pipeline? Or do I have the pipeline filled with crap and a
Hmm.
lot of wishful thinking? So that's the first thing I want to do when I inspect the pipeline and coach it. Do I have enough volume in the pipeline? Do I have enough deals that I'm working on that, based on my win rate, I can achieve my goals? And then, do I have velocity in the pipeline? Are the deals flowing through? Are they moving through the pipeline? Or if I have sufficient pipeline, but everything's stuck,
Hmm.
I'm not doing anything. So when you look at a pipeline review, the objectives of the pipeline review are really pretty simple. And, frankly, you know, once you start getting into the rhythm of a pipeline review, you can do really comprehensive pipeline reviews in about 15 minutes.
Hmm.
So what I advise people to do is to say, be very clear. The review process is so powerful for sales managers. It's where we get to kind of kill several birds with one stone. We get to, from a business management point of view, understand kind of the state of the business. Do we have enough pipeline? Do we have winning strategies for our deals? Do we have people making the right kind of prospecting calls? All those sorts of things. But the other power about the review process is it's a tremendous opportunity to coach and develop in a very focused way. So I can coach in a pipeline review. I get the opportunity to coach my person on developing and maintaining and building pipelines. On deal reviews, I get the opportunity to coach them how to build stronger deal strategies, how to maximize their ability to win, how to compress the deal cycle, how to maximize deal transaction size or margin, and so on and so forth. So in these different reviews, I get business management information, and I get focused coaching on a specific discipline. And that's, I think, where we get the real power in leveraging our time and building the capabilities of our team.
Yeah, I love that idea about what you said about being able to do an effective pipeline review in about 15 minutes, because obviously that's one of the fundamental things that we built in pipeline or CRM, the visual focus on the pipeline, being able to see what's in your pipeline, being able to look at it from a number of dimensions. Do you have enough in your pipeline? Do
Yep.
you have enough of a multiple? Where are they? Where have opportunities? Are they overdue in certain stages? So I really love that
Right.
idea of the focused pipeline review, because that's what we took as a fundamental for building our system. Okay, so let's switch gears again. And
Mhm.
this is probably, for me, the biggest issue that I've come across in every organization, I've been involved in, and every organization I've been involved working with. And the biggest complaint I hear from everywhere is, where do you find good salespeople? Right? I mean, how often do you get asked that? Oh, David, can you give me some ideas on where I can find really good salespeople?
Finding good salespeople is really a challenge. And the problem is is that when we start looking for good salespeople is usually when we're pressed to have somebody in place.
Yeah.
For instance, we may have lost a person, we may have had an addition to headcount, and we have that empty position that we're desperate to fill. And so if we start trying to find a good salesperson at that time when we're pressured to try and get somebody in place, inevitably what happens is we start taking shortcuts. We start sacrificing on the quality of the person that we're looking for, and inevitably probably hire the wrong person because we want to move so fast to try and get that position filled. And I think what we miss is that each one of these hiring decisions we make is a multi-million-dollar decision. We tend to think of what are the recruiting costs, what are the onboarding costs, what are the salaries for, 90 days, 6 months, or so on and so forth. And if they don't work out, we can get rid of them and replace them with somebody else. But, what we're really looking at is a multi-million-dollar investment. It's, we're looking at the lost opportunity for that open territory. Or putting the wrong person in, and the damage that they do to customer relationships over a long period of time. So I believe you start looking for salespeople when you don't need them. I think the really effective sales managers I know are always on the lookout, whether they're at a trade show, whether they're, looking at LinkedIn and participating in a group discussion, whether they're, sitting in an airplane and talking to the person right next to them. You should always have an idea in mind that I'm going to need to grow my sales organization, or I'm going to need to bring new people in. So I've always got to be looking. I've always got to be prospecting and building my pipeline of or my bench of people that will fit. And the way we need to do that in a structured way. So one is we need to have a model of what the ideal salesperson looks like. And that model has to look at things like attitudes and behaviors. It has to look at things like cultural fit. It has to look at experiences, skills, competencies, capabilities, and so on. So we have to have a very rich model, or kind of a picture of what my ideal candidate looks like. So then as I'm meeting people, I can match them to that picture. But I think the most critical thing for any sales manager is always be recruiting.
Yeah, so I'm talking with David Brock, author of the Sales Manager's Survival Guide. So let's talk about results, right? It's all about results at the end of the day. So how do you get the best out of people, and how also do you make that hard decision that that this person isn't going to produce for me? And what do you do?
Well, I mean, one is first, you got to make sure you have the right people in place in the first place. You can't maximize performance, you can't maximize the ability to achieve your goals if you have the wrong people in the first place. So part of the role of the sales manager is to say, do I have the right people? If I don't have the right people, or if my people aren't doing the right things, how do I coach and develop them to be doing the right things? And if that fails, how do I exit those people and move them into jobs where they can contribute, and then backfill recruiting the right people? So we have to have, again, that framework of what does ideal performance look like? What does ideal performance, depending on the level that I'm looking at, what are the right metrics to be tracking to make sure that people are doing the job? What are the right kind of qualitative things that I should be looking at in terms of the behaviors and attitudes and how this person works? And as a manager, my job is to continually to build and build those things and drive those capabilities. But inevitably some people will fail. And it's not because they're bad people. It's just they're the wrong people in the wrong job. And we have to really, I think one of the problems I see with managers is they avoid it. I see lots of articles and posts around, coach your A players. or coach your B players and things like that. Nobody likes coaching a C player. They're pains in the asses. They're problems
Yeah,
to deal with, and it's not a lot of fun. I'll spend all day coaching an A player because it's fun engaging them.
sure.
But they're still part of our team and they're impacting our performance. So we can't avoid the C player. We have to look at, can we, in a reasonable period of time, develop that C player into a B or A player? Or more likely into a B player. Yesterday, in fact, I was on the phone with a client in Australia, and the sales manager had this person. The person's been on board for 18 months. She was worried, well, we haven't done the right job in training the person and so on and so forth. But I responded, as you go on calls with a person, are they doing the right things? Do they, you know, they may not be executing it well, but are they doing the right? And we came to the conclusion that this was just the wrong person in the job, and they've been avoiding it. So she had to take action. So we do have to figure out, who fits, who doesn't fit, and move people into the right roles. And sometimes that's moving them out of the company.
Yeah. And I think it was Peter Drucker who said that one of the biggest mistakes that leaders and executives make is to not move people out of the job fast enough. That we always try to we push it off, and maybe we change the job a little, maybe we move them a little, maybe we say, okay, well, let's stop coaching our A players who are going to bring us a load more money, and let's focus on coaching the C player who's never going to bring us any money, and let's just throw good money after bad. Um,
Yeah, and I see that all the time. Again, it's not fun working with these people,
sure,
but the more we avoid it, the more we're hurting them. The other thing you think about too is they're probably smart people
of course.
as well. They're probably not happy. I mean, they're probably, you know, they probably recognize that they aren't doing a great job. And sometimes we need to really sit down and be honest with them and say, where would you be happier? Where would you perform better? If you have other jobs in the company, great. I recently fired somebody, and in the discussion after he got through his anger and grief, he, about a week later, he called me up and he said, Dave, this was the best thing, to happen to me. Even though I don't like it happening,
Hmm.
it got me off my rear end to really try and find something where I could be successful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think sometimes you're denying the person the opportunity to go find something that they'll be successful at. So sometimes I think it's almost selfish. I know nobody likes
Yeah.
doing it, but it's almost selfish when you keep a person in a position that they're failing in. Okay, here's another interesting one as we come to the end of this discussion. But you talk about business management, and that for me that's fascinating because I do think that business acumen and understanding the business of business is more critical than ever. But talk to me about business management and what you mean by that.
Well, as managers, we have multiple things that we're responsible for. One is developing and coaching our people, but the other part is we're responsible for the business. We're responsible for making sure that our people are executing the strategies and priorities of business. We have to make sure that our people are going after the right customers, that they're producing the right results, not only in terms of kind of revenue and quote attainment, but are they selling the entire product line? Are they engaging the right customers? Are they growing into the markets that we want to grow into? So there's a certain part of our job which is really stewardship around the business. It's around, what we do as frontline sales managers is we translate the corporate strategies and priorities into day-to-day execution by our people. And so we have to make sure that our people are doing the things that drive the business. I make the example in the book that say you're a company that has two product lines. Say you have each salesperson is making their quota, say $1 million each. One is just selling product line A, and one is selling product line A and product line B. Which is the better salesperson? Clearly the better salesperson is the one that's selling the whole product portfolio because that's your company's strategy. So as managers, we have this stewardship responsibility and this business management responsibility to make sure that our people are executing the strategies and priorities of the company, that they're doing it as efficiently and as effectively as possible, that they're growing and building their capabilities over time.
Okay, so let's finish off on something that's obviously dear to our heart here, and that is tools, right? Uh, it just seems to me today that everybody is getting overwhelmed with sales tools and point solutions. And like there's a new sales tool coming out every day, and your salespeople are going, hey, look at this prospecting tool, and look at this tool that, and this app on my phone that if I just press this, it just, generates all these prospects and basically fills my pipeline and I don't have to do anything. Uh, Talk to me, how does a sales manager figure out what are the critical tools and how do they avoid all the noise and attraction of shiny new toys?
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem. We actually are involved in some research right now with CEB on the area of complexity. One is the area of organizational complexity, and one is what I'll call individual overwhelm. And what you're starting to see with salespeople right now is, well, with everybody, but with salespeople in particular, is you're seeing this kind of concept of cognitive overload. It's
Mm-hmm.
the brain can just process a couple of things at one time, but what happens is we're switching. It's either, different things are grabbing our attention and we switch from one to the other in just a second, So for instance, I notice out of the corner of my eye, I'm getting some emails. And and just that fraction of second that I notice the email alerts coming up diverts my attention, and on you start looking at it over time, what happens is actually the body chemistry or the brain chemistry is really interesting. The switching time and the time that's allowed that it takes to refocus on the original task, just out of the corner of my eye, seeing that Outlook message pop up is uh, it takes 5 times as long to refocus. You notice I kind of stuttered just a
Yeah,
moment
I know.
in
It is
refocusing. Is so that really dramatically impacts our health levels, our ability to get things done. So as we start looking at kind of the sales stack, we see the same thing. Say we're starting with our base CRM system, pipeline or CRM. But say we've got a whole bunch of other tools. Maybe we've got Eloqua or Marketo or HubSpot or some marketing automation tool. Maybe we have some other kind of emailing tool and all those sorts of things. As we start switching our attention between these things, we start getting this cognitive overload. I have to remember the workflow in Pipeliner is this, the workflow in Marketo is this, the
right.
interaction and so on. And what we're seeing is sales managers in the intent in trying to be helpful are actually loving our people to death. Is we keep providing them more tools, but it makes doing their job much more complex. So I think we have to be very attentive to this concept of cognitive overload and complexity. I think we have to be very attentive to the overload and overwhelm factor that we create and make sure that we aren't, in trying to be helpful, that we are actually loving them to death. And so we have to be very attentive to the tools that we provide. We have to be very attentive to the overload. We have to be very attentive to the distraction factor.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with you. And that's why I think people need to be more discerning in the tools that they select and also realize that people have a finite attention span and a finite amount of time, and that should drive their decisions. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up there. That's that 30 minutes has flown by, David. This is fascinating. Again, David Brock. You should really read this book. It's the Sales Manager Survival Guide. There you go.
Yep.
Excellent book, available in hardback, available in Kindle. You can go to Amazon.com and find it. You'll see the reviews there and how helpful people have found this book. I found it fascinating. I think it's one of the most underserved areas is sales management. It's been overlooked, and I think so many people, and it's sad that so many people have been dropped into a job and have floundered, not because of their innate talents, but because they haven't been prepared properly for the job. So if there's one message that comes out of this is, buy the book for your people, but for goodness sake, if you're going to put somebody in a sales management job, train them.
Yep. Train them and coach them. Just like you train and coach your individual contributors, train and coach your sales managers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, listen, thanks, David. That's a great chat this morning, and thank you for making the time.
Thanks, John. It's a real pleasure. I appreciate it.